Welcome to the Toyota Solutions studio. Women all over the world are combating hate, and I have one of them with me now, Heidi Beirich, who is a director at the Southern Poverty Law Center, really the authority when it comes to gathering data and statistics on hate crime. Heidi, it's really nice to meet you, and thanks for coming by the studio.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm curious what the intersection is between women's empowerment, gender equity, and the kind of hate crimes that you research at the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Well, look, hate ideology, hate groups are about as misogynistic as you can possibly be. They're obviously also against any kind of alternative notions of sexuality, whatever the case might be. And many of the policies that we see in the United States that ultimately end up discriminating against women or fostering an idea that discrimination is legitimate are rooted in ideas of white supremacy that do not treat women as equals or anywhere near there. Lord only knows, it comes to the LGBT community and, of course, every single minority. The denigration is very stark as well.
And I understand there's also sort of a domestic violence connection.
Yeah, we have found, in particular, people that go on to commit major acts of violence, right, white supremacists and anti-government extremists, they're often involved in domestic violence against their spouses, partners, mothers, before they get to the point of actually engaging in domestic terrorism. So there's a real link there between domestic violence and terrorism.
All right. Wider lens now. It's the year 2017, and from what I have read, there has actually been a significant uptick in the number of hate groups in this country. Can you talk about what the statistics tell us?
Yeah, we have counted 917 hate groups in the United States as of 2016. That's about double what we found 15 years ago. So there has been a racist backlash in this country that's fueling these kinds of organizations. It's been going on for some time. Obviously, the election of President Obama added fuel to their fire, right, to the white supremacist fire. But the bigger issue really is that this country is changing demographically rapidly. The Census Bureau says that in the 2040s, whites will no longer be a majority in the country. And so if you're a white supremacist, that scares the bejesus out of you, right? You can't control this place. And the problem for the rest of us is we want a peaceful transition to a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy because, after all, we're all the same, right? What's the issue? And these are the people who are standing in the way of that, whether it's through hate crimes, pushing their ideas, domestic terrorism. So it's a real serious problem.
Is it generational? Are these hate groups made up of older white Americans?
If you had asked me 5 years ago that question, I would have said maybe the hate movement is going to die off.
Yeah.
But the sad fact is that there's an entire generation of millennials, young white males, who have sort of risen up to take leadership of many of these organizations. A lot of people have heard of Richard Spencer at the National Policy Institute. There's probably 20 or 30 prominent millennials running hate groups today. And that's unfortunate because I really thought perhaps this was a movement that was dying off. I can't say that anymore.
Not only that, but I understand the same phenomenon of this uptick in xenophobia and white supremacy is actually global. Is there a connection between groups we see here and groups we might see in Europe, for example?
Absolutely. So the white supremacist movement doesn't define itself by borders. In fact, their slogan is white pride worldwide. They see themselves as all members of sort of a Caucasian Western family that's losing power, whether that's to immigrants, to Muslims, whatever the case may be, to non-white people. And so all of these organizations have forged ties across the Atlantic, and they're pretty tight with each other. They give money to each other, they support each other, they share their ideology. It's an international movement across the Western world.
So at the same time that we see these disturbing trends, we also see things like the Women's March, which was the largest march in history, and it was global, and it was women marching in solidarity, and I really viewed it personally as sort of an anti-hate rally. What's the role of that resistance movement in combating these ideologies?
Well, look, the only thing that combats this kind of hatred and white supremacy are mass movements. Whether it's Martin Luther King, the Women's March, which was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, amazing, global, it was an amazing thing. I mean, look, the kind of hate that we're fighting right now is bad, But when Martin Luther King and his allies started the civil rights movement in the 40s and the 50s, there was only a very tiny amount of Americans, white Americans, who supported black civil rights. We're lucky enough to know that more than a majority supports our vision of equality. So when you get out there on the streets and when you stand up for your ideas, that is the biggest way to push civil rights. Always has been, always will be. It is the way to change the world.
Heidi Beirich, that is a great note to end this interview on. Thank you so much for all your work.
Yeah, my pleasure.